Welcome back, everyone. It is June, so sorry I missed May. Did have an April update, so I went from going every 6 months to going every other month, so hopefully I'll get back to doing something about every 30 days. So what we've accomplished since the last video, I've got the coal track now done to Standard Plate Glass Company, and if you recall, since the Clearfield branch is going to be up here and go through into the other room, part of this building will be covered by an upper level that's, I forget what it is, maybe 14 or 16 inches above, maybe not quite that much, probably 14 I think. So that'll shroud the back of the building, but the Standard Plate Glass Company was a very, very large facility in Butler, Pennsylvania. So I might be able to do some things to just try and make it appear larger than it is. So I don't know if I covered this previously, but what I started doing on version 2.0 here of the Pennsylvania Division is everything I'm doing for the main lines and sidings are all Code 83 Atlas Flex Track. I thought about using microengineering track, and I might switch to that simply because I'm using microengineering rail for all the spurs and yard tracks. And the profile of Code 83 rail between Atlas and microengineering doesn't match. I imagine microengineering's is probably closer to prototypical. But for now, I've been using Atlas, and so that's on HO cork, and the main is on HO cork. The siding is on N-scale cork, and I use 3 pieces just to get it the right width, just to give the difference in elevation. And then everything else is hand-laid Code 70. So the sand track into Standard Plate Glass, which was done I think for the last video, that's Code 70 on wooden ties right onto the homosote. And now the coal track's the same way. We'll have a road here, I forget what it's called, but I'll name it whatever the prototype is, at least was in 74. This was actually a number 5 turnout that used to be up at the Burke Parsons Boley creosote plant in Falls Creek, also in Code 70, so I was able to reuse that for this version of the railroad. And then all of the turnouts, everything I'm doing with turnouts are hand laid. So in this particular case, this is off of the main line, so that's still a Code 83 turnout, and then transitions down to Code 70. I don't think I had this done either. This is a scrap yard and welding supply company that should have been on the other side of the creek, but I think I discussed that last video that I'm doing some compression, but definitely trying to follow the prototype a little more faithfully this time around. So this is all Code 70 hand laid as well. And this is a package of 1,000 microengineering spikes, and believe it or not, that's my 3rd one I'm on so far. So in what I've done in just hand laying, I've already gone through 2,000 spikes, which is hard to believe. But so just this morning I just about wrapped up putting the ties in for Carter Lumber Company for that spur, so that'll be hand laid Code 70. Here is the completed hand laid number 19 crossing in Code 70. And for that, just like I've done on some other occasions, I think with a 3-way turnout for my old railroad, I used a Fast Tracks paper template, because while I use the metal jigs for turnouts, which are redundant, and you do a number of those, I don't know how many 19-degree turnouts, or crossings rather, I'm going to do. I'm going to have other crossings because we have other interchange points. Certainly in Falls Creek, there's a crossing with the Penn Central. I think that's closer to a 90-degree though, so I'll probably just do a paper template for that. And as I mentioned in the last video, from what I can tell from early 1970 USGS maps, the spurs for Carter Lumber Company and International Staple and Machine actually did cross in this configuration. That's since been, there's still a crossing, but it doesn't quite lay out the same way. And then so here's the spur into ISM, and this, best I can tell from aerial photography, this spur actually went into the building, so probably the building will start here, and then it was kind of a bump out where the rail cars were, and then the main part of the building was beyond that. So I'll try and replicate that to the extent that I can. So in this part of Butler proper, we've got standard plate glass, we've got the scrap yard, we've got Carter Lumber Company, we've got ISM. And then moving around, again, here I have the main line, and here I have two sidings. This siding essentially begins the interaction or the connection with the Bessemer and Lake Erie at the Y. And then this is a yard track, so this is down at Code 70 hand laid. This is on N scale, HO scale cork, N scale cork. Again, these three are all Atlas Flex. So then coming around in this direction, we start picking up the other yard tracks, and I have finished the interchange, which was called Butler Transfer. This is the east leg of the Y. As I mentioned before, I did not model the west leg of the Y, which would have been over here behind Carter Lumber Company, which wasn't really that close to standard plate glass. So I chose not to model it simply because I didn't think it added anything other than I'd have to build a turnout that would never get used. So I opted not to do that. I think this particular area really does lend itself, and at least captures the spirit of the interchange between B&O and Bessemer and Lake Erie. So here I decided to do a run-through track, although it won't go anywhere. So this is up on N scale cork, Code 83, and then these two tracks are hand laid Code 70 right on the homosote. So I finished all of Butler Yard as well. So I've got the 4 tracks, one of which runs all the way through. Then I got 3 classification tracks. Obviously the full length double-ended one can be used for classification also. The intent there was that you've got the main line, and depending on which way the train would be going, I should back up, a schedule that I have for the early 70s or late 60s. Almost every train that came through Butler either set off or picked up cars. So the way I've arranged this, not exactly following the prototype, but similar, if a train is going in either direction, they can set off or pick up cars at either end because you've got sidings at both ends. So the Butler Yard crew will be able to set up a block of cars to be picked up or pull blocks that have been set out. And I think this whole area will be very, very flexible, which I think it needed to be at the time. So moving on, so these are yard tracks. So these are all Code 70 hand-laid number 6 turnouts. And again, the one on the siding here is a Code 83. So I'm trying to kind of develop a standard by which I follow to just to create the hierarchy of rail height and rail weight. Not sure how evident that'll be over time in terms of operating, but develop a standard and stick to it. And that's definitely this is a higher level standard than I had on my last railroad, so I'm trying to improve. And again, just really happy with how hand-laid turnouts operate. Turnouts with a cast frog, in my opinion, once I did my first hand-laid turnout, just how smooth it ran through the frogs, I was like, wow, this is really worth looking into and doing. So that's the plan. Other than the staging yards, all the turnouts are going to be hand laid. So here we get to the end of the Butler Yard and what is essentially East Butler. And there were 2 industries, I think, that were rail served. One was Spang and Company that made, I think, electric motors. So this now is all hand laid Code 70 right on the spline. Another paper template developed or allowed me to develop and create a number 6 curved turnout, which I think is a 36-inch radius on the outside, 24 on the inside. Again, that really didn't take that much longer than doing a regular turnout in the jig. The crossing, the 19-degree crossing, did take longer because that's a little bit more. There's a whole bunch of points you have to work out. I also finished the spur into Keystone Tubular Service Company. So that is in, and then again, Code 83 Atlas Flex on the main with super elevation using masking tape. Code 83 on N scale for the siding, which is the Butler Runner, which will be the switching lead for Butler Yard, and also with masking tape super elevated, but a little bit less aggressive than the main line. So that's as far as I've gotten. the plan from here is to just really work on bench work, and then the other benefit to using flex track for the main line is I can really start moving in terms of progressing the main line around the basement. And I really, two reasons I think I took the time to do all the spurs and sidings and yard here in Butler. One, just to kind of prove out the standards that I had developed, and two, now, if I want to, I could at least run a local train and do some switching just in between, periods of laboring away trying to get the railroad done. So the next task is to continue the bench work, or the framing rather, for the peninsula in the first room here. So this board, this is attached. This next board is not, but it's laying almost exactly where it'll be. So coming out of East Butler, it'll loop around this way, still maintaining a minimum 3-foot aisle. And there'll be spots where the aisle is even bigger. As you can see up here, it really doesn't show very well on the video perhaps, but these two sides are not parallel. This side actually comes back towards it. So up here is going to be a bigger area than 3 foot wide. So you have a spot here that's about 3 feet. That'll follow through here. Then you'll have a 3-foot aisle here. And again, you can see this framing, although the bench work will come 2 feet in, does diverge from the staging yard. So this will create an area here that's much larger. And that's the first space you come into when you come down into the basement. So this will be kind of a gathering area. So, during an op session, if someone's between trains, they can hang out here and watch without really getting in the way. So the next main goal here is to get all this framing done basically up to here, and then the 2-foot shelf will run on the back side of the framing that's already in for Butler and East Butler. So I really don't have a lot more framing to do in order to get the peninsula for the first room framed. And once that happens, then I can go back to doing the bench work and spline, and I'm just going to put the turnouts in wherever there's a siding or an industry, but I think I'm just going to plow ahead and try and get as much main line as I can. We'll see what happens when I get into Echo, because there's a big Y there with some sidings that'll be at the end of this section here, and then so it'll run around this way, and that's where the Echo Y, the Royal Valley branch, would tie in, and that goes underneath the Butler area, which I showed in the last video. And then coming up this way is the Dayton grade. So this will be actually pusher territory. I think I'm going to use one fake leg of the Y down here that doesn't actually run to the branch to store helper power. And they did use helpers coming up the Dayton grade. So it'll come all the way up. There'll be a lift out here at the Bilko door, which goes right to my driveway, which is super convenient for bringing all the lumber in. And then come around the corner, and then the bench work along here will be probably maybe a little narrower than 2 feet. I think I have room for 2 feet to do. I'm pretty sure I have 7 feet in between the framing and the wall. So it might be 2 feet here, but as we get closer to the steps, it'll taper down to a real narrow shelf just to go across the end of the steps. So, and in steam territory, or sorry, steam era, there was a Y here in Dayton, so the steam engines could turn around and return back to Echo. I'm going to model the remnants of that, but in diesel era, the helpers pushed all the way up into Punxsutawney, because there was a grade coming down out of the Simpson Tunnel into Riker Yard. So the helpers will actually, it's a pretty long helper run. You're going to run from the far corner way over here all the way into the other room. And somewhere midway down this wall, about where the punching bag is, I guess, will be Punxsutawney Yard, which will be very, very long. I'll be able to hold 24 car trains and 3 units in a caboose on all of the arrival departure tracks. But that's a pretty long helper run. Again, the water meter will be underneath the bench work, so you won't see that. I'll have to put one other lift out here, probably with a backdrop on it, just for the breaker panel. So that is the progress we have so far. It took me a while to get through Butler, but like I said, I wanted to prove out my standards in terms of rail code and using cork, and where not to use cork, and where to super elevate, where not to super elevate. I've also prepared everything for ABS signals too. So the Butler main is on a separate sub bus from everything else. So the main will be signalized. I did not signalize the siding in this location. I might do it elsewhere. In this location, this siding, per the timetable, is under the control of the Riker yard, or the Butler yardmaster. So I did not elect to isolate that from all of the various other common tracks within the Butler area. So that may change for the next town, depending on, if I have a siding out in the middle of nowhere that obviously is still dispatcher controlled, I might signalize that as well. I'll do some research also. The only other thing I'm contemplating is here at WS Tower, and I did not follow the prototype here deliberately because I wanted to have just a single track for a road crossing. The prototype, the Butler Runner, which was actually a different railroad at one point in time, the Butler Runner runs right across into what will be the northern branch, and there was a crossover here to the main line. So essentially the only way, and the crossover was oriented from the siding to the main, so the only way trains coming out of Butler Yard could actually go up the northern branch is they would have to, apparently in the prototype, they have to use the runner. I didn't want to be locked into that because, if you're using a fast clock, which I'm contemplating doing, the yard crew really might not be able to afford to not have access to the runner. So this way I can have the trains running up to the northern branch use the main, and they can just come straight through, take the turnout to the northern branch. So here we'll have three routes, so two turnouts. The main line, there'll be a turnout, a number 6 or a number 8 to the left here that'll go to a stub-ended siding. In reality, that was double-ended siding, but I think for the most part, that's where they stored power. We'll talk about that in a second. Then the northern branch comes off in this direction and looped around and actually went underneath the main line. And so we're going to do that here, and the northern branch is going to tuck in behind the scenery or behind the backdrop and run. There'll be maybe two, possibly 3 staging tracks for the northern branch. So it'll be a very short run for the northern branch, but just provide more work here in Butler Yard where those trains originate and terminate up to the Butler. I think there were actually 2 trains in each direction. There's a couple refineries up there in 74 that are still there now. A couple other businesses in 74 that I don't think are there now. So it'll provide, probably 8 or 12 car trains in each direction a couple times a day just to create some more traffic in and out of Butler. So, but the reason I'm talking about the northern branch is they had some serious restrictions. I think the timetable specifically states, or I read in an article somewhere, that the northern branch, I think a GP30 was the heaviest locomotive and largest locomotive they could run. So I'm contemplating buying a whole bunch of Code 55 rail, and since there's not going to be any turnouts until you get into staging, I'm contemplating doing the northern branch in Code 55 hand laid, just because it's not that long of a run, but it might be kind of a neat transition. And if I buy a full bundle of 66 pieces of 55 Code 55 rail, I'm sure I can find a use for the rest of that Code 55, either on some of the classification tracks up in Riker at Punxsutawney, or maybe for the Rural Valley branch. We'll see. To be determined. So the coming back to the power pocket that I'm just going to stub end a siding, and I don't know how far I'm going to go. I don't really need probably more than 3 or 4 locomotives. But the practice was westbound trains coming into Butler a lot of times would have 3 locomotives because they needed that dynamic braking effort to come down the Dayton grade. And once they got into Butler or East Butler, from here down to Pittsburgh or even to Connellsville was not nearly as steep. So a lot of times if you had a long train coming westbound, you'd stop here at WS Tower and drop one of your 3 units, so you'd only have 2 units going west. And then conversely, trains going eastbound, when they got to WS Tower, if it was a long or heavy train that had 2 units, they would pick up a 3rd unit at WS Tower. I think in reality it was probably 3 units going eastbound, and they would pick up 2, because I think they were usually running 5 4-axle locomotives. Again, compression and selective compression, even in motive power. So I'm going to do 2 units west of WS Tower, and if it's a heavier train, I'll put a 3rd unit on going east. And that third unit will stay on all the way to the other end of the railroad, because the real challenge was going up over Mount Jewett. So I don't know how many helpers they tacked on the end in addition to the head end power there, but that's in my railroad, that's off railroad, that's all in staging. So that is where we are so far. Sorry for rambling on so much, but just trying to give everyone a sense as to what I've been up to for the last 2 months or so. And I'll do my best to try and get something in July so that we can see the progress, and I'll keep trying to get on more of a 30-day schedule. And so hopefully the next thing you'll see is bench work, framing and bench work, wrapping up this peninsula. And I hope, and my suspicion is that it should really start moving faster once I'm done, because the framing takes a little while, and then I'm just, once the framing's finished, I'm just on bench work, and that's just going to wrap around the back of the existing framing, and then run around the walls. And in a lot of the cases here, like in Craigsville, I think the whole town of Craigsville might have 6 turnouts. Echo has a bunch too, but nothing like we had in Butler and East Butler. So I'm hopeful, hope springs eternal, of course, but I'm hopeful that the pace will pick up here, and I'll get the main line into the other room before too awful long. So more to follow, but that's where we are for now. Thanks for watching.